Maya had just wrapped up a long, exhausting shift at work and was looking forward to a quiet evening. She stopped by the supermarket to pick up a few essentials before heading home. The parking lot was packed, filled with people rushing to complete their weekend shopping. After circling around several times, she finally spotted an open space near the entrance. Letting out a small sigh of relief, she carefully pulled in, making sure her car was properly aligned between the lines. Just as she reached for her purse to step out, the sharp screech of tires startled her. A white SUV aggressively pulled up beside her, stopping just inches away from her car. The driver, a middle-aged white man, glared at her through his open window, his face flushed with anger. Before Maya could even process what was happening, he was already yelling. "That was my spot," he snapped, his voice filled with frustration and resentment. Taken aback by his hostility, Maya blinked in confusion. The space had been empty when she arrived, and she hadn't noticed anyone waiting for it. Still, she remained calm and responded politely. "Sorry, but I didn't see anyone waiting here," she explained, keeping her voice steady. But instead of easing up, the man only grew angrier. He threw open his car door and marched toward her, blocking her from exiting her vehicle. His stance was aggressive, his eyes filled with hostility. "Don't give me excuses," he sneered, shaking his head in contempt. "You people are always like this, taking whatever you want without thinking about anyone else." The words hit Maya harder than she expected. She had dealt with subtle racism before, but this was different. This was direct, unfiltered prejudice staring her in the face. Her heart pounded, but she refused to let her emotions take over. She took a slow breath, trying to diffuse the situation. "I really didn't see anyone waiting," she repeated, her voice measured. But it was clear this wasn't just about a parking spot anymore. Maya could feel the tension thick in the air as the man stood just inches from her car, his face twisted in anger. His aggressive stance made it clear he wasn't just frustrated about the parking space. There was something deeper, something uglier behind his hostility. She had encountered racism before, but never this direct, never this confrontational. "Oh. Of course you didn't see me," the man scoffed, his voice dripping with disdain. "You people never pay attention to anyone else, do you?" The way he said "you people" sent a chill down Maya's spine. It wasn't just an argument anymore, it was an attack on her very identity. She could feel the weight of his prejudice pressing down on her, trying to make her feel small, unworthy, as if she didn't belong. She took another deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. She had seen situations like this escalate before, and she didn't want that. "I really don't want any trouble," she said, her voice steady but firm. "It's just a parking spot." But her attempt to de-escalate seemed to enrage him even more. His eyes burned with fury, and he took another step closer, pointing a finger in her face. "Who do you think you are to talk to me like that?" he barked. "I'm so sick of your kind, acting like you own everything." Maya clenched her jaw, feeling her pulse race. She wanted to walk away, to remove herself from the situation, but the man was blocking her path, his body language screaming intimidation. Around them, a few people had started to take notice. Some glanced in their direction, but no one intervened. Maya made a decision. She would not engage any further. She turned slightly, prepared to step around him and leave. But before she could take a step, the sharp sting of a slap struck her face. The world seemed to freeze for a moment. A hot, searing pain spread across her cheek, and her breath caught in her throat. The man had actually hit her. And then, as her shock turned to anger, Maya did something she never expected. She hit him back. Maya stood frozen for a moment, her cheek burning from the unexpected slap. The sting wasn't just physical, it was humiliating, infuriating. She could feel the heat rising in her chest, her pulse pounding in her ears. For a split second, she couldn't believe what had just happened. Had this man really hit her? In the middle of a crowded parking lot, over a parking space? But she knew the truth, this wasn't about the parking spot. It never was. As she processed the shock, she saw the man step back slightly, a smug smirk curling on his lips. He looked at her as if he had just taught her a lesson, as if he expected her to cower, to shrink away. His eyes were filled with a twisted sense of satisfaction, like he had just put her in her place. But Maya wasn't the kind of woman to let something like this slide. Without hesitation, without even thinking, she raised her hand and slapped him right back. The sound of her palm striking his face echoed in the parking lot, sharp and unmistakable. It wasn't as hard as his slap, but it was enough. Enough to let him know that she wasn't going to stand there and take it. The smugness disappeared from his face in an instant. His eyes went wide with shock, as if he couldn't believe she had dared to fight back. He stumbled back a step, one hand instinctively flying to his cheek, the same way she had just moments ago. A murmur rippled through the small crowd that had gathered nearby. A few people pulled out their phones, recording the scene. Maya could feel their eyes on her, but she didn't care. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides, her body still tense from the surge of adrenaline. "How dare you hit me?" the man sputtered, his voice shaking with a mix of rage and disbelief. Maya stood her ground, her breathing heavy but controlled. She had no regrets. She wasn't going to let this man intimidate her, wasn't going to let him get away with what he had done. For the first time, she saw something in his expression that wasn't just anger, there was fear. He had expected her to stay silent. He had expected her to be weak, but Maya had shown him otherwise. Maya stood there, her heart still pounding from the confrontation. The sting on her cheek remained, but she was no longer focused on the pain. Instead, she watched the man in front of her, his face twisted with both shock and rage. He had never expected her to fight back. That much was clear. The murmurs from the small crowd grew louder, and Maya could see some people recording with their phones. For a brief moment, she wondered if anyone would step forward to say something, to defend her, but no one did. They just stood there, watching. The man, still fuming, spat at the ground near her feet before storming off without another word. Maya took a shaky breath and turned toward the supermarket entrance. She had come here for groceries, just a normal errand after work. Now, she felt drained, her mind replaying everything that had just happened. She gripped her shopping basket tightly, trying to push the frustration away as she walked through the aisles, picking up what she needed. But when she stepped back outside, she immediately knew something was wrong. Her stomach twisted as she approached her car. Deep, jagged scratches ran along the side of it, cutting through the paint as if someone had dragged a sharp object across it on purpose. Her hands clenched into fists. She didn't need to guess who had done this. The man, the same man who had insulted her, slapped her, and walked away furious. He had come back and vandalized her car out of spite. Maya looked around, scanning the parking lot, and then she saw him, sitting in his white SUV just a few spaces away, watching her. His arms were crossed over his chest, his expression smug, as if daring her to react. A wave of anger and frustration surged through her, but this time, she didn't let it consume her. Instead, she pulled out her phone and took a deep breath. Enough was enough. She dialed 911, her voice steady but firm, as she reported the incident. She had let too much slide in the past, but not this time. This time, she was going to fight back the right way. Maya stood next to her damaged car, her phone pressed to her ear as she spoke to the 911 operator. Her voice was steady, but inside, she was boiling with anger. She had tried to walk away, tried to move on, but this man had made it clear he wasn't done. As she described the assault and the damage to her vehicle, her eyes never left the white SUV parked just a few spaces away. The man was still sitting inside, watching her, a smug smirk tugging at his lips. He didn't even try to hide. He wanted her to see him, wanted her to know that he had done this. Maya's grip on her phone tightened, but she forced herself to stay calm. This time, she wouldn't let her emotions take over. She wouldn't give him the reaction he was looking for. A few minutes later, the sound of sirens cut through the air, growing louder as 2 police cars pulled into the parking lot. Maya felt a sense of relief wash over her. Finally, there was someone here to hold him accountable. As the officers stepped out of their vehicles, Maya quickly approached them, explaining everything that had happened. She told them about the argument, about the slap, about the damage to her car. She kept her voice clear and precise, making sure not to leave out any details. One officer took notes as she spoke, nodding occasionally. The other turned and walked toward the white SUV, where the man was still sitting. Maya watched as he rolled down his window, already shaking his head, his hands gesturing wildly as he started talking. She couldn't hear what he was saying, but she already knew. He was going to lie. He was going to twist the story, play the victim, make it seem like she was the one who had attacked him. Maya clenched her jaw, taking a deep breath as she braced herself. She had seen this happen before, how easily people like him could turn things around. But she wasn't going to let that happen this time. This time, she had the truth on her side, and she wasn't backing down. Maya stood beside the police officer as he finished taking notes, her heartbeat still unsteady from everything that had happened. She could see the other officer speaking with the man who was now waving his hands in the air, his voice rising as he desperately tried to spin the story in his favor. From the occasional words she could make out, it was clear he was painting himself as the victim, claiming she had been the aggressor and that he'd only acted in self-defense. Maya clenched her fists, frustration bubbling inside her. She had expected this. People like him never took responsibility for their actions. They always found a way to twist reality to their advantage. Then, the officer standing next to her asked a question that gave her a glimmer of hope. Are there any witnesses? Anyone who might have seen what happened? Maya hesitated, quickly scanning the parking lot. There had been people around when the argument happened, some had even pulled out their phones. But she wasn't sure if anyone had actually recorded the moment he slapped her. And then it hit her. There are security cameras, she said, turning to the officer. The supermarket must have surveillance footage of the parking lot. The officer nodded, immediately radioing his partner before heading toward the store's entrance. Maya watched as he disappeared inside, her heart pounding with nervous anticipation. If there was footage of what had happened, then there would be no way for the man to deny it. Minutes passed, each one dragging on longer than the last. The man was still arguing with the other officer, his frustration growing. But as soon as the first officer returned, his expression had changed. He walked straight over to Maya, his voice calm but firm. We were able to access the security footage, he said. It captured everything. Relief flooded through Maya's body. Finally, undeniable proof. The officer turned toward the man, his demeanor shifting. Sir, we need you to step out of the vehicle. For the first time since the altercation began, the man's smug confidence faltered. Maya watched as the officer's words sank in. The man's smug expression faded, replaced by a look of disbelief. His eyes darted between the officers and Maya, as if trying to figure out a way out of the situation. But there was no escaping now. The security footage had caught everything. Sir, step out of the vehicle, the officer repeated, this time more firmly. The man hesitated, gripping the steering wheel, as if holding on to his last bit of control. But when he saw that the officers weren't going to back down, he finally let out an exasperated sigh and shoved his door open. This is ridiculous, he muttered as he stepped out, his face red with frustration. I was the one attacked. I was defending myself. Maya stood her ground, watching as the officer calmly instructed him to place his hands behind his back. You're being detained for assault and property damage, the officer stated. What? You can't be serious, the man protested, his voice rising. He turned toward Maya, his eyes filled with venom. You're going to regret this. You can't do this to me. Maya didn't flinch. She had spent too much of her life being afraid, letting people like him get away with things they shouldn't. Not this time. As the officer secured the handcuffs around his wrists, Maya could hear people in the parking lot murmuring. Some had their phones out, recording the arrest. She wasn't sure how she felt about that, but deep down, she knew it was important. People needed to see that actions like his had consequences. As he was led toward the police car, the man continued to yell, insisting that this was unfair, that he was the real victim. But no one was listening. The truth had already been laid out in front of them, undeniable. One of the officers turned back to Maya. Would you like to file a formal complaint? He asked. Maya didn't hesitate. She lifted her chin, her voice steady. Yes. I want to see this through. For the first time that night, she felt a sense of control. This fight wasn't over, but she was ready for whatever came next. Maya sat in the police station, her hands resting on the table in front of her as she carefully wrote down every detail of what had happened. The room was quiet except for the faint murmurs of officers talking in the background. The weight of the night's events still pressed heavily on her chest, but she refused to let it overwhelm her. This was her moment to make sure the truth was recorded, word for word. Across from her, an officer read over his notes, occasionally glancing up to ask a follow-up question. Maya answered each one carefully, making sure to be as clear and precise as possible. She knew that men like Mr. Smith, yes, now she had a name to go with the face, would do anything to twist the story in their favor. He had already tried to paint himself as the victim in the parking lot. She had no doubt he would continue to do so. A few minutes later, another officer entered the room, his expression serious. He placed a file down on the table and looked at Maya. Mr. Smith is denying everything, he said. He claims that you attacked him first, and that he was only acting in self-defense. Maya let out a slow breath, her fingers curling into fists beneath the table. She had expected this. Still, hearing it out loud made her stomach tighten with frustration. "That's not true," she said firmly. I tried to walk away. He blocked me. He slapped me first. I only defended myself. The officer nodded. "We know." The security footage supports her statement. Relief washed over Maya, but she knew this wasn't over yet. Mr. Smith wasn't going to accept responsibility easily. He was going to fight this. "We have enough evidence to move forward with charges for assault and property damage," the officer continued. "Would you like to proceed with pressing charges?" Maya didn't hesitate. She had come this far. She wasn't going to back down now. "Yes," she said, her voice unwavering. "I want to make sure he's held accountable." The officer gave her a reassuring nod. "Then we'll make sure justice is served." For the first time that night, Maya felt a sense of certainty. No matter what happened next, she was standing up for herself, and that mattered. The courtroom was silent as the jury returned, their faces unreadable. Maya sat still, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. This was it, the moment that would determine whether justice would truly be served. She stole a glance at Mr. Smith, who sat across the room with his lawyer. His face was tight, his usual arrogance replaced by something closer to uncertainty. The judge cleared his throat, and the foreperson of the jury stood up. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty on all charges of assault and property damage." Maya felt the tension in her chest release, like a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying. A sense of relief washed over her, but it wasn't joy. Not exactly. Justice had been served, but the scars from that night, both physical and emotional, wouldn't disappear overnight. Mr. Smith, however, was furious. He shook his head, his lips curling in anger. "This is ridiculous. You'll regret this," he spat, but the officers were already leading him away. This time, his words held no power over her. As Maya stepped out of the courthouse, she felt the cool breeze on her face. The battle was over, but the larger fight was still ongoing. Racism and prejudice didn't disappear with one conviction. People like Mr. Smith would always exist, trying to use their privilege to intimidate and oppress others. But that night in the parking lot had taught Maya something important. She had a voice, and she wasn't afraid to use it. In the weeks that followed, Maya found herself reflecting on everything she had endured. She realized that her story wasn't unique. Every day, countless people faced discrimination, violence, and injustice simply because of who they were. And while not everyone had the opportunity to stand before a court and see their abuser held accountable, they all deserved to be heard. Determined to make a difference, Maya began speaking out. She joined organizations that fought for racial justice, sharing her experience to inspire others to stand up for themselves. At first, it felt small, just one voice among many. But then, one day, after a speech, a young woman approached her. "Thank you for sharing your story," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "It made me realize I'm not alone." And in that moment, Maya knew that standing up had been worth it, because justice wasn't just about one verdict, it was about the change that came after.